Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I would like to begin our joint meeting with the school board and the city council. I want to thank you guys for being patient with me. Myself and the vice mayor just left Virginia Beach. Probably we broke the speed limit. Getting back from meeting with the leader of the free world, President Biden. So thank you all for your patience. In any event, want to recognize certainly the leadership team, my contemporary across from me, Chairman Dr. Cardell Patillo. Good to see you, sir. Dr. Bracey, sir, it's good to see you as well, Superintendent. And I see that the Vice Chair hasn't arrived yet, but on behalf of the City Council, I want to welcome everyone to this joint meeting, and we look forward to sharing information. So at this time, I think we need to call the roll. Yes. So for my members on council, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes. Mr. Hugo.
Present.
Mrs. Lucasberg. Here. Mr. Moody.
Here.
Mr. Tillett.
Here.
Dr. Whitaker.
Present.
Mayor Glover.
Here.
And Kathy Chambliss will call the roll for the school board.
Yes, ma'am.
Here.
Present.
Here. 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 Here.
Thank you all. So Dr. Patillo, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Honorable Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. This evening with us, we want to introduce some special guests who embody the work we are highlighting and supporting Dr. Bracey's proposal. First in this presentation, you will hear about our priority on career and technical education. Here with us is Ms. Karen Roberts. Ms. Roberts, will you stand? Ms. Roberts is a nutrition and wellness teacher at Manor High School, and last month she had been named the 2023 Virginia Association for Career and Technical Education Teacher of the Year. In addition to teaching, Ms. Roberts serves as the advisor for organizations such as Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America. And just 2 years ago, she was one of just 24 teachers nationwide selected to participate in the National Leadership Fellowship Program for the association. She is a shining example of the outstanding instruction our CTE students receive as part of our programs. And thank you for being here tonight. Also with us here tonight is our 2024 Citywide Teacher of the Year, Mr. Alfonso Woods. And also with him is his lovely wife on this evening. You're going to hear about our efforts to recruit and retain the best teachers and best staff to work here in Portsmouth. It is hard to get better than Mr. Woods. Mr. Woods has been the Portsmouth Public Schools for more than a decade, and in that time, he has served in a number of capacities, including working on division-level committees, taking part in collegiate teacher workshops, and being an active member of school improvement and local leadership teams. As a teacher, Mr. Woods places an emphasis on modeling content and then inspecting for student mastery, while also implementing techniques such as kinesthetic learning, where students practice by exercises that support specific learning objectives. We are rooting for him as he goes on to compete at the regional level, and I thank him for being here with us on tonight as well. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, after careful deliberation, meeting with school board members, gathering data from staff, parents, and students, I would now like to bring forward Dr. Bracey to present our estimates of needs for this year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Patillo. Good evening, Mayor Glover, Vice Mayor Lucasberg, and Ms. Terry, and members of the City Council tonight. Tonight we want to share with you our consideration of our estimate of needs for the 23-24 school year. But before I begin, I must give credit where credit is due. I have to recognize our very talented Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Theodore Falk. I'd like to thank him and his entire team for completing this budget proposal. In fact, at this time, I will defer to Mr. Falk as we begin our presentation for this evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Sir.
Justice Chair, so
Yes.
Brown, Mayor Glover.
Stand to the podium. Come to the podium.
Can. I will relocate here.
Good evening, Mayor Glover, Vice Mayor Lucas Burke, Ms. Terry, members of the City Council, and members of the School Board. I wanted to be here tonight to just provide clarity on our FY 2023-24 Superintendent's Estimates of Needs. And with that, next slide, please. So in this first slide, just to make sure that many of you are very acquainted with how our fund structure works, but for the public, I want to make sure that they were understood where we are with our funds. At the heart of our funds is the general fund, which is about 77% of our budget. That is the fund that funds all of our school activities, our school operations, anything that we're doing within the schools, it funds that. Our next largest fund is the grants fund, which encompasses grants from federal, state, and local organizations. That is at 9% of our budget. So some of those grants might be our CTE grants, our Title I grant, special education, and any of the other grants that we have. Next, you'll see our risk management fund. As Mr. Glover can attest, risk management relays all of our health insurance, self-insurance, health insurance, as well as our dental and all of our other benefits for our employees, insurance premiums for our property casualty, as well as our workers' comp. Next, our cafeteria fund. That operates like an enterprise fund, meaning whatever funds it takes in, that is what the money we use to operate our cafeterias. And obviously, by the nature of it, it's for our food services for our schools. And then lastly, at 1% is our textbook fund. The state funds us for textbooks each year. And so that money goes in that fund to be used for textbooks either in this year or future years. Because to be honest, to do a textbook adoption, that's about $2 to $3 million. The state funds us about 1.2, 1.3 every year. So if we only use the funds that they did in 1 year, we wouldn't have enough to provide for textbook adoption across the city. Next slide. This slide gives you the total of all our funds that are under the PPS perusal, which is a total of $247.5 million. Obviously, it includes all of the funds that we talked about earlier. This particular presentation we give you focuses on the general fund because that is where most of our funding and flexibility resides, but I wanted to give the public and to the City Council a view of what we had under our perusal, again, at a total of $247.5 million. Next slide. Our proposed operating budget for this year. If we take a look at it for this year, it's a $190.3 million is the estimate for 23-24. That is about $7.9 million above our current budget. Dr. Bracey will give you details about what this budget includes in a few minutes. But obviously, it includes those initiatives that were identified, as Dr. Patillo said, by our school board, our community, our students, our staff as priorities. Those priorities encompass a lot because it takes a lot to run and manage and operate an effective and efficient school division. So we've diligently worked to balance a conservative budget need. In places where we need to upgrade and make additions, we've asked for it. And then we've also did so to make sure that our students in our community have quality educational experiences that they so richly deserve. So we'll get into specifics with Dr. Bracey in a few minutes, but I wanted to give you a view of our current funding situation at revenue level. Next slide. Before I do that, though, I wanted to go into a state budget revenue error. A lot of you heard about a revenue error that happened at the state level with their calculation tool. Every year for the budget, the state gives us a calculation tool based on what they consider, based on the governor's budget or the House or the Senate, the funding that we receive. Very complicated formula. You couldn't do it if you wanted to by yourself. So on January 27th, I say January 27th because we presented, I believe, on February the 9th. We were notified from the state that they had found an error in their budget calculation tools, not only for FY 23-24, which would be next year, but also in 22-23, which is the current year. That error was related to adjustments that would have been necessary to basic aid as related to the whole harmless grocery sales tax. What happened there was last year they reduced the grocery sales tax by that 1%. If y'all remember, in January, that 1% went away. Or it was 1.5%, I believe. And so in the calc tool, the way that the state manages the calc tool, any increase in sales tax revenue, it then results in a decrease to basic aid. So it's an inverse relationship. If they give us $2 million more in sales tax, in the calculation they subtract $2 million for basic aid. So sales tax revenues are what the state tells us we are going to get. We can't move or change that information because it comes from the tax authorities. If they tell us we're getting $2 million more, we put that into our budget. But then it also subtracts from basic aid. Well, what they did was they forgot to subtract the whole harmless from basic aid, thus making the error. Next slide, please. So that error would result in a loss of revenue to PPS of about $867,000 in the current year. Remember, we received this information on January 27th. We're almost 7 to 8 months within the year at this point. And then $2.1 million from the estimates that they gave us in the Calc 2 for 23-24. Obviously, the General Assembly is exploring their funding strategies. They've gone through crossover, but they have not made any total decisions as to how this funding area is going to be approached. The Senate and the House took two different approaches. The Senate took a better approach, I'll be honest with you. The House did not. So we don't know right now if they're going to close that gap. Now, in this presentation, I made the assumption that they're going to close the gap and do the right thing. But I just wanted to let everybody know that if that solution is not reached, it may result in more revenue that we need to ask for from somewhere. But that is because of a state error, not a PPS error. Next slide, please. So this gives you a snapshot of our budgeted revenue sources. And as you see, we have state funds, we have local funds, we have state sales tax, other funds at 1%, and then federal funds at less than 1%. The total revenue for this budget is $86.5 million roughly. As you see, 55% of our money comes from state funds, which is about $105 million. That is all of the things that the state tells us they're going to give us based on our ADM, as well as our local composite index, ADM being average daily membership. That is the number that determines how much money you get from the state based on your enrollment. Secondly, your local composite index, which is the ability of the locality to pay for their schools. We have a lower composite index at 0.2413, which basically means about 24% is what the state is saying is the composite index for the city. And therefore, we get more state money than, say, some more affluent districts who are at higher local composite indexes. I'm going to go to state sales tax funds. That's about 10%. That's about $19.6 million as their estimate. We use it. Local funds, at this point, this budget presentation, we're using level funding. Dr. Bracey will talk about other things at the part of his presentation at 33%, at $59.9 million. Other funds are like miscellaneous funds that we get for tuitions, rebates, recoveries, other funds that come in at 1%. And then our federal funds are primarily ROTC funds as well as impact aid funds. Impact aid being money that we receive from the federal government because of the concentration of military facilities and people in the area, not only military but civilian, on bases on military property in this area. So that gives you a snapshot. Total budget revenue sources of $186.5 million. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Bracey.
Excuse me, Mr. Falk.
Yes, sir.
Are you going to take some questions, or how do you want to run that? Want to go through the proposal first, and then let's take questions. I think that's the better way to do it. That way we don't get confused.
Thank you, Mr. Falk, for providing that information. Mr. Falk just took you through quick budget 101 from the school board perspective, but he will come back and answer any specific questions. So in planning for this year's budget, I had two clear priorities, and that was shared by our staff, our community, and our board in our budget conversations that we had. These priorities were employee compensation and school security. First, let me talk about the compensation. Last year, when I came to you, it was my recommendation of a 5% raise for all employees. I'm here again requesting another 5% increase for all PPS staff members. You can leave it there. As in last year's governor's budget, it included a 5% raise, but that was only for SOQ positions, which we will explain more in detail if needed. However, we realize that the vital role of every staff member plays an important position in our school division. Therefore, I'm again proposing that all employees receive that 5% raise, and that will be a cost of $6.7 million to the division. Thanks. Additionally, also included in the governor's budget, I'm proposing a 1% bonus for all employees who return to the division for the 23-24 school year. This bonus will be paid in the fall of 2023, and it will be estimated at a cost of $800,000. We know that our teachers, bus drivers, employee groups deserve infinitely more for the work they do for our children each and every day. However, given the constraints of state funding this year, I can say that we're doing the most that we can to keep our salaries competitive to those in the region. That said, we will continue our advocacy efforts at the local and state level for increased funding for public education, specifically in regards for staff salaries. While developing this year's budget, we also heard directly from many of our auxiliary service staff members and the difficulty they are experiencing in retaining staffing when compensation in the private sector has well outpaced their current pay. That is why I'm recommending an additional 5% increases specifically to our non-exempt employees in auxiliary services, including custodial services, building maintenance, warehouse, and food services. In the latest of a string of shootings that simply should not be taking place in today's world, we have seen too much violence at schools, too much violence in our own communities, and too much violence across the nation. As such, we're continuing to be proactive in finding solutions to keep our schools safe and secure as possible. As you know, we have ordered new weapon detection systems for all of our middle and high schools. Last month, we requested that you further support this effort by allocating $4.6 million in additional funding to buy these same systems at our elementary schools and centers. However, we also need additional comprehensive supports as well. Tonight, I'm proposing the creation of a new position, a school safety coordinator, who will oversee the management of our security programs such as technology, as well as they lead all requisite safety training for the division. In addition, with that implementation of these new systems, we will also need new personnel on site. I'm recommending the addition of 20 part-time security officers that will be based at our elementary schools in the morning arrival times to help with the screenings and also provide support at the needed schools. This will be an additional cost of $530,000. Of course, we know that being proactive, we are looking at measures beyond personnel and new software. The heart of the issue comes to addressing students' unique mental and social emotional needs. As you may have seen in maybe a couple of Sundays ago in the Sunday edition of the Virginian Pilot, we have been diligent in finding solutions and resources to support our community's mental health needs, including our Here to Help website, partnerships with companies like Care Solace and Panorama, and even seeking grant opportunities for additional personnel. We're continuing this effort by providing more social emotional learning resources in our division and training for all staff members. We also want to make sure that we're making the appropriate interventions at the right time for our students when they come to us, including our youngest learners, and that's in our division's preschool programs. The sooner we can get the students in our doors and to support their learning and their behavioral expectations, the more successful we will see in their transition into a comprehensive school environment and their scholastic achievements. Tonight, I'm recommending an additional $300,000 to fund additional resources for our preschool program. Those were among the largest new budget items in my proposed budget tonight. However, I do want to assure these boards that I'm also recommending the continuation of expansion of some successful programs that we currently have, which includes our career and technical education programs. These include the expansion of our in-house CTE programs to include GoTech, welding, building trades, and automotive technology, a pilot program for financial literacy instruction, and the continuation and expansion of the division's dual language immersion program. Additional support for maintenance of our facilities, including equipment and contracted services, and general fund transfers to cover allocated risk management expenses, specifically any increases associated with healthcare coverage. To summarize, we're expecting proposed revenues of approximately $186.5 million. Our total expenditures are expected to be approximately $190 million. As a result, we're requesting an additional funding of $3.78 million from the city to fund the initiatives proposed tonight in our general operating budget. While this is another request for additional funds this year, it is my ardent belief that it is necessary in order for us to provide a safe, secure, and comprehensive learning environment for the children of our cities and families, staff, and community as a whole. Moving on to our capital improvement program, you will note that our requests remain consistent from years past. We're again requesting an investment in both a new K-8 middle school as well as a replacement for Churchland Middle School. This will allow us to transition to a full middle school model throughout the city, with all middle schools housing students in grades 6th, 7th, and 8th. Continuing in our work in career and technical education, we want to have a comprehensive CTE facility in our division, which will allow students to receive the necessary skill and certification training right here. Similarly, we have seen great success in our CTE programs for students. We want to continue to expand our offerings to meet the needs of the city's workforce. Finally, we're working to continue the work of upgrading our HVAC units throughout the division. As you know, we received funding for this effort as part of the American Rescue Plan Act. We have also been working with Mr. James Wright and city leadership to continue these modernization projects with this funding. Next slide. This concludes my budget proposal. As always, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share our priorities. I want to also thank our board leadership for their partnership in building this budget, as well as, again, our capable budget team that made these requests possible within the tight confines of this budget cycle. And we, Mr. Falk and I, will be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Priest. I know Councilman Hugo, you had your hand up initially. Do you still have a question?
I do. I have a couple. So on the budget revenue sources slide, the triangle slide, you have numbers here, but it doesn't say whether those are projections for 23-24 or are those the current numbers in 22-23?
No, all the revenue presented here are 23-24
Okay,
projections.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
And so the additional 3.8 $8 million would need to be added into the 59.9 that's shown there against city funds, correct?
Yes, sir.
Got it. So, Dr. Bracy, the 5% raise for all employees, is there, so that's an across-the-board raise. Is there a need to address pay compression for experienced teachers, so we don't lose experience because their pay isn't getting bumped up enough to reflect their experience?
Yes, it is. And we've talked about that in years past. One of the things that we want to do, so that when we bring this to you, we want to bring it to you from a third party. So we're already having discussions now about putting out an RFP for someone to come in and provide that salary study for us so that we can present that to council, because with that is going to come the request for additional dollars, millions of dollars to help us break that up. So that is something that's needed. I had a teacher advisory panel meeting last night, and that was one of the questions that came up was, what do we plan to do to address the steps? Because you're bringing it up, so evidently if you have a teacher that was hired 5 years ago and you have one that comes on next year, it's not going to be too much of variation in terms of salary because we're not able to give the steps due to the compression issues.
Okay, so it's kind of related to that is kind of from looking through the current financials, you've got $62 million budgeted for teacher salaries this fiscal year, and the glide slope that you're on right now is only going to consume about $42 million to pay teachers. So the difference is teachers that you budgeted for that we weren't able to find and hire. Is there anything in here that you think will help stem that going into the summer to maybe put us in a better position to try to fill the vacant teacher positions?
Well, we've been researching, looking at seeing what has been successful in the other divisions to try to hire the teachers. I meet weekly with HR to look at incentives that we can and put in place.
Is it just pay, or is there something else that we ought to be looking at?
I think the majority of it is pay.
Okay.
When we survey our teachers and I have the conversations with them, it's a pay issue.
Okay.
Because they look around the region, when they can go to another division and be placed on the accurate step, then that's an instant raise for them above and beyond the 5%
Right.
that's already being offered.
Okay, last question. So on the mental health slide, you talked about programs that you're intending to leverage. Is there an investment that we need to make? Because you didn't mention a cost associated with implementing or leveraging those programs.
Yes. With those programs, we can break that out for you, but we wanted to list that to show the number of programs that we have in place. And it's right, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Whitaker, so you have the floor.
Yeah, Dr. Patillo and the school board members and Dr. Bracy, Mr. Falk, thank you for the presentation. As you know, the past two fiscal years, we have fully funded. It is my hope that we will continue in that direction, particularly because we realize that there were significant cuts from the state years ago that our school districts have not recovered those funds. And so you already are behind. And so level funding in an environment where you have increasing costs is no more than a cut. And so I'm hoping that we will continue along the lines that we have for the past 2 years and fully funded it, because it is definitely needed and you have presented that need. My question goes to some information that was brought up at a meeting in regards to state funding and the state composite index. And just want to hear from you, Mr. Falk, in regards to the correlation between this state composite index and the increased tax revenue that the city may receive. Will that have an impact on how the schools, will that impact how the school receives funding from the state?
Right. Yes, the LCI index, again, is one of these lovely, complicated formulas that I wouldn't even begin to try to start talking to you about. It's a big formula that they do. But basically, it takes the locality's ability to pay. So that takes into account real estate, the property real estate, the taxes that you receive, and a whole bunch of other things that they put in a gumbo, and they stir it up, and then they come out with a number. So the short answer to your question is, the more revenue that a city or locality receives, the inverse relationship will be that it will increase your local composite index, meaning you will have a lower amount of state funds coming in. So yes, sir, your question is dead on. The casino will bring more revenue, which means it will affect our local composite index.
Has there been any analysis of the potential impact that could have on your state funding?
Not on our side, mainly because I don't have any information as to what the casino will bring in.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if we get that information, we would probably need to get to the state and talk to them about maybe doing some modeling. They don't have a modeler, so we'd have to talk to them to get some modeling done as to if we increase X. Second thing, and like I said, property values. Property values are a big determinant of it. I'll give you a good example. A place like Charles City, Virginia, small locality, but they have a lot of historical homes that are worth a lot of money. There's not a lot of money in that county from the standpoint of revenue or industry, but those historical homes raise their local composite index beyond what it really should be because of the value of property. Surrey is another example. Surrey Nuclear Power Plant is in Surrey. Surrey has a 0.8 composite index, the highest in the state, because of Surrey Nuclear Power Plant. So everything around you affects the local composite index.
Because there have been some statements that have been made about the amount of money the casino's bringing in and the revenue, but it hasn't been a whole story that's been given. And so, in regards to that issue, when would you expect to know that impact?
I mean, we could touch base with the state and see what kind of modeling we could do. If we could get information maybe from Ms. Turner and her team about maybe what the estimates will be, and then also the estimates of what the property value increase would be. And they could probably give us some model to say, if X occurs, this will what happen. This will be what happens to your local composite index. Okay. But my feeble mind couldn't do that alone. I need some help.
And could you, for the benefit of the citizens who are listening, we use this term SOQ quite a bit, and you see the state sending so much funds, and then the question becomes, if the state is funding these positions, then why do you need the money from the city? So can you explain why that gap is there?
Sure. Standards of quality are the state minimum standards to fund schools in this great commonwealth that we live in. I'm looking for something. But what that means is the state says, and I'll give you a good example to highlight this. They say, we fund elementary schools assistant principals. In our SOQ, we get an allocation of 3 assistant principals. We have 13 elementary schools. If we staffed at 3 assistant principals across the whole division, we would kind of be substandard and not giving what the public would need to be. But that's SOQ standard. Let me take that a step further. And every place in this in the state standards is like that. You get 1 per this and 1 per that, but it's not adequate to fund the school. The same thing when we talk about raises, where people, when the governor goes on TV, hey, I gave a 5% raise. Well, they give a 5% raise based on the SOQ positions at the prevailing cost rate across the whole state. If yours is higher than the prevailing cost rate, then you've gotten less money than some of your peers. The other thing that happens, and I'll give you a number, we have 742 SOQ positions that raise is presented on. We have about 2,100 employees that we pay full and part-time. So about a third of them would be covered by that raise percentage. That's where the rubber meets the road, ladies and gentlemen, because the state never tells people that. They tell you, oh, we funded a raise, we funded this, we funded that. But in the calculations, it's not enough to support what happens in the real world.
And then you take into account a district like Portsmouth that has high poverty levels.
Yes, sir.
And you can't have one teacher.
Yes, sir.
And so those ratios don't
Yep.
work in a city like ours.
Or some of the services that we have to provide that some of our localities may not because of the socioeconomic status of many of our residents. Things that other localities don't even look at. We have to do it to make sure that our students and their families are taken care of.
And then my last question as of now, there has been a need for teachers to get trained. Some of them seek other degrees, higher degrees for administrative positions. As we know, there are some cases that are before the Supreme Court that could impact on those teachers, the student loan forgiveness, the affirmative action case. Are there any types of assessments as far as with Portsmouth and funding our teachers to get the higher degrees, what impact that may have, and is there going to be a budgetary need to help that so that we can maintain quality teachers in the classroom?
We have a number of staff development initiatives in our budgets just regularly. A lot of the money that we're using for that type of stuff, Dr. Whitaker, is coming from grants. We've just received a mental health grant that will cover our guidance counselors, our social workers, and our psychologists. And just today, I had a meeting this morning about that. There's a federal grant that the state provided for Portsmouth Public Schools. I believe it's 8 or 9 localities. We were one of the 8 or 9. And we're going to provide money under that grant to support the education of those groups of people and trying to help them advance. Because if they advance, let's say they go on to get a master's degree, well, guess what? They get a supplement for that. That provides for their family. We have a number of grants that we're doing that in. We have some grants through HR that provide those types of things. We've used grant money for that mainly because there's a lot of it for professional development. And when you have a grant like that, and when it comes down to evaluation at the end of the grant and sustainability, you're eligible for another one. So we want to build capacity through there to make sure that we can give our teachers and our staff the ability to get professionally developed and also to bring it back to the division and train others. Because I love a train-the-trainer model. Dr. Bracey teaches that to us all the time. Train the trainer. You go out, you get trained, and you bring it back and train others. And then that way we're better together than apart.
So as far as pursuing higher degrees, does the district fund that for teachers?
We do fund some. I will tell you we don't have a lot in this budget, and that's why we went to grant funds, because a lot of times that's one of those things at the end that we say, well, we have grant funds that can do that. Let's go forward and use those since they are there. Because again, we don't want to leave any grant funds on the table. They're ultimately free except for the work you have to do to put in to get them.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. We always in education when you come, and we appreciate the information. The new piece to us is the state budget, the loss and funds that are there, and we're hoping that our legislators will be able to find that error so that that's not a loss.
Yes, ma'am.
And if that is, that affect the request amount that we are looking at here?
It could.
Okay.
The state and the House, one of the houses of government, and don't quote me, I don't know which one, they think that adding more sales tax revenue to the budget solves the problem. It doesn't. It exasperates the problem. Because again, if you add the sales tax, you subtract from basic aid.
Right.
So and the sales tax estimate, I'll be very honest with you, if the state gets that sales tax estimate wrong, we go into recession, anything like that, we have to eat that. So in other words, if we get to the end of the year and we go in recession and we have $1 million less in sales tax revenue, I got to eat it. Now, by the same token, if we get more revenue, they don't take that from us. But again, Any additional sales tax revenue affects my basic aid, so it's a wash. They, at the bottom of the basic aid formula, they have a subtraction for what the sales tax estimate is. And when they give us our final numbers, that still subtracts from the bottom. So to me, an increase in sales tax is not an increase in revenue. It's a place where somebody's playing a shell game, in my opinion. I'll just be honest with you, because most people don't know that it subtracts at the bottom. They just know, ooh, we got more sales tax money. It's not an additional revenue. And that's what the fight in Richmond is about right now. How do we close this, for us, 867,000 in this year and 2.1 in next year gap? Because nobody can agree on how to do it. It'd be very easy to me. Just throw some of that surplus money and close the gap. But they're not going to do that.
And my last question is about the capital fund with the construction of the 2 new schools. I know we keep pushing the can down the road, and the cost of goods and services and building schools or any other construction is increasing. So, I mean, we don't have a number. Do we have any plan to?
No, ma'am. We would have to get into the process of planning that school, meaning the programming. What type of programming are you putting in that school to get a good estimate? Because as you said, the inflationary costs are going through the roof. Easy, simple things that we thought were easy to get are now not easy to get. At cement,
Right.
Steel, anything that you're looking at, the costs are rising every day. So the estimate you get today, unless it's a firm estimate, will be changed in 2 to 3 months. So, no, we do not, unfortunately, because you have to program before you get a firm estimate.
Right. And I know the buzzword in the street has been some technical school. I mean, every other person that I talk to wants a technical school. So I don't know if that's part of what can be built into something later or down the road as well. But I think it would be worth taking a look at.
And that's in our request. That is in our request. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Tillage, sure, you have the floor.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Dr. Falk and Dr. Bracy and School Board for this
I'll take
presentation.
it.
You got a new title, sir.
Yes, sir. I'll take it.
I think you all presented some great needs for our city, for us to be able to move our school division forward. And I definitely am in favor of what you all have presented, being a former school board member. Dr. Whitaker made mention to the state composite index, and there's actually a report that was just completed by the Commission on Local Government that reflects on the re-benchmarking of K-12, as well as the effect that the casino will have on localities such as Portsmouth. And so I think that might be a good way for our city leadership and our school leadership to begin having those conversations so that we can plan in the future for what this casino is going to have on the impact on our school division. Also, for the capital improvement, I would like to see if our school board and city council can come to an agreement to see that if we could allow the school division to have control of their CIP budget, CIP funds. I know at the end of the year they have a lot of appropriations that they have to send back, but we have a lot of needs in our schools that need to be fixed, a lot of capital improvement projects. And I think that having the school division having that autonomy to do that, they're duly elected just like we are. I think that they should be able to address those needs. So as we're going into this budget cycle, if we can look at that to allow them to manage their own CIP. I know it's done. Previous city councils have allowed that to happen. I don't know why it was ever taken back by previous councils, but I would like first to at least entertain that subject.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions, Mr. Moody? Sir, you have the floor.
Yeah, question about the budget proposal, your recent security request. Is that part of the budget, or are you still waiting on a decision on that?
The 4.6, yes. What the email that I sent to Ms. Terry was that at that time it was an approximate number of about 4.6. We met this afternoon, and we do have some numbers, and I think by the end of the week I'll be able to submit a firm number, because we wanted to survey the schools to give an accurate number of what we would need. We knew it would be in that ballpark, but I will have that for you definitely by the end of the week. It's in that same range. Yes.
But my question is that part of the budget proposal?
Oh, it's outside of that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's-
so that was an emergency request? Is that?
Yes.
Is that right characterization of it?
It is. We already had the secondary schools already covered. You know, that was something that was already put into the budget when we asked for that $2 million to come back to outfit the secondary schools. So that's done. We're anticipating arrival sometime the end of March. As a result of what happened in Rich Neck and Newport News, the board decided that we don't need to wait. Part of our plan has always been to outfit all of our schools with weapon detection systems. We were doing this, we were headed down that road before that incident occurred. But when that happened, the board gathered and said, we need to do something immediate at our elementary schools as a result of what happened. So that's how you saw the request come for the additional 4.6.
Okay. Does that include, I know that metal detection is important. How about video detection within and outside of the schools? Is
Yes.
that being addressed?
That will be part of the amount that will be submitted to Ms. Terry by the end of the week.
Okay, so
all of that will be included. Because I didn't want us to just rush to put up weapons detection systems without having all the other areas covered. You know, if somebody opens a door, we want to be able to get a system alert, and we also have a camera to show us where it is, who it is, so it can be addressed immediately. We don't want to be guessing. If we're making this type of an investment, we want to make sure that we have all those areas covered.
Very good. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Dr. Whitaker, so you have the floor.
So in line with what Councilman Moody asked, the security equipment has already been encumbered.
For the secondary, yes.
I do have a question. So first of all, I have a comment. I want to thank you for your leadership on the fact that you guys are doing a lot of good things in the schools to keep them safe. One of the initiatives, your Here to Help initiative, I think is right spot on. You're doing a great job of that. Also, you know, I read recently about the grant, the $15 million grant that will be provided that Mr. Falk spoke to that will help with mental health and other things. In addition to that, you all are doing the offering of mental health care coordinated services. And I think that's cutting edge. I think you all are very insightful and looking ahead in that. The Here to Help initiative, outstanding. One of the things I had sent out, because I have an opportunity as mayor to talk to mayors all over the country, and one of the organizations that I serve on is called Mayors Against Illegal Guns. And I sent some information out to you all, this data sheet that talked about how to stop shootings and gun violence in schools. And so one of the things I want to read to everybody in the room, and I'm just asking because I don't know how this works, but you know, the data suggests that when you talk about one example of bringing safety to schools and using metal detectors, this is endorsed by the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association. It talks about metal detectors not necessarily being the best option because in most black and brown schools, it leads to young people taking on some sensibilities because of that. So I just wanted to get a point of view on that first. And the other thing that it talked about was this whole outline talked about intervention, what you guys are doing, mental health intervention. It even spoke to perhaps if we were thinking about as an aggregate to impact safety, perhaps we put those funds that we were thinking about putting in metal detectors in mental health intervention programs. And thereby, and it talked in here specifically about hiring intervention teams, right, with mental health professionals to be able to intervene in those young people's lives and the families' lives. And I just want to read something that I thought was pretty impactful to me, and it talked about solutions. And it talked about a couple of solutions, but this part, it said, these solutions empowers in educators and law enforcement to intervene to address warning signs of violence, to provide support that students in crisis need, and to keep shooters out of schools. These actions must be taken with due consideration for potential racial disparities and ensure that students of color or with disabilities are not negatively affected. They include fostering safe and trusting school environments that can prevent violent incidents, creating evidence-based crisis intervention programs in schools to identify and support students who may be in crisis, implementing evidence-based security upgrades to prevent shooters' access to schools and classrooms, and initiating trauma-informed planning protocols so that staff can secure schools and law enforcement can respond appropriately. I'm just asking a question. I mean, do we look at data when we think about putting in metal detectors and those kinds of apparatus? Do we look at data to suggest that that could have a negative effect? And I'll just preface that by saying, you know, because I know sometimes people, I'm asking the question because I want to know, but both of our grandchildren attend Newport News Public Schools. So you can only imagine how my wife and I felt when we got the call that there was a shooting in a Newport public school, elementary school. Mm-hmm. So I'm just asking the question because I want to know that we're taking all the necessary steps, and I certainly support 110% all of those measures, but can we do more? Should we do more on the side of the mental health intervention? And would that be adequate and a good use of our resources?
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. It's not one that I mean, I've heard it. You know, we've talked about it in our Region 2 superintendents meetings. You know, we span all the way from the Accomack, the Peninsula, to the South Side, and it's varied opinions throughout our region. There's varied opinions across the country. One thing I learned when I was, working on my doctorate is that you can find research to support whatever the argument is that you want to make.
Absolutely.
So that's there. So that's one of the things that, so when I hear that, there's always another side. I can find whatever I want to support my position. You can find whatever it is you want to support yours. So we listen at that, but then we also listen at the people here. That's why we survey. You know, we have conversations with the board. And I have conversations with the teachers. I have conversations with the parents as well as the students. I do that quarterly. And since this incident, safety has been the priority. I asked the question yesterday specifically to the parents, and they were from elementary to high school. I said, how do you feel about metal detectors, weapon detection systems being in the schools? Because I've heard that sometimes there's a fear. There's something that affects the mental of the students, the younger students, right, as they come through. Right. And the parents said, I don't have a problem with it. And that was an elementary parent, because she knows the bigger picture to her. What's going to make her feel better when she sends her child off to school is that, hey, I know that he or she should be safe. So that's what we listen to when we make these decisions. You know, this was not a knee-jerk situation, as I shared. We were doing this, we were going down this path prior to this. We did the pilot of the systems that we're going to implement. We did that in December of 21 at Manor High School, and assistant principal, Mr. Brooks, is back there now. We ran that pilot back then because there were things happening in our community that we wanted to address, you know, to keep guns out of the schools. Because we got to look at our environment first, and we got to look at what the suggestions are from our community, our parents, our citizens. That's how we came to that point. And with the mental health piece, that's why you hear the Here to Help. You know, that was born out of the pandemic, but it's not ending. We're steady increasing our offerings for the social and emotional needs of not just our students, the care solace, that benefits staff, that benefits families as well. So that's what we're doing. You know, we made a pitch, a proposal to the National School Board Conference at the end of this month. They've accepted our proposal. We're going to go down and we're going to, the chair and I and Mr. Nolasco, we're going to go down there and present our Here to Help program.
Yeah.
So we're above like everyone else, just like you said. So, you know, I like to commend, you know, our staff, you know, for coming up with this idea. You know, it wasn't me alone. It wasn't the chair alone. It was a collaborative effort of all of us within our division to get to that point.
And you guys are doing a phenomenal job. Thanks.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and Dr. Bracy, I want to thank you for how you answered that, because it's a lot of times we approach it as an either or, and it's really a both and that's what I see this district is attempting to do, address it at both ends. And so I appreciate that type of leadership that knows what the community needs and knows how to address it. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. I don't think we have any other questions. If you all don't have any other questions for us, School Board Member Hines.
Thank you, Mayor.
You have the floor.
Just to address the building concern that Vice Mayor brought up, local regional school divisions prior to the pandemic had priced out schools, and of course everything comes to a halt. So as they are beginning their processes again, you're looking at schools that were looking to cost between 35 and 37 million are now looking upwards of 65 and plus. So it's not a true double, but the cost of business has increased significantly, and I don't know when it's going to right size, but speaking with other members from around the district, I can give you that piece. Yep.
Thank you.
I just want to say in reference to the compensation study that Councilman Hugo mentioned, in Central Virginia, a couple divisions have just completed theirs, and similar to the same size as ours, but they're ranging between $16 and $18 million as far as what the need is to bring teachers up to their correct steps. So we've been talking about compensation study for years. It's just we know that when you complete that study, you have to do something with it.
Right.
And you just can't let it sit there. So it's definitely going to be we're going to do an RFP, but it'll be an extreme need for partnership between both to decide how we roll that out and how we bring that together and then make that happen.
Well, Mr. Chairman, certainly I want to also thank you for your leadership because sitting in a similar role, I know it takes a lot of work and listening to get to where you get, but you've got an outstanding team, outstanding leadership at the superintendent and staff level. We're grateful, okay? We're grateful to have you all. And I just want you to know that on behalf of our council, we look forward to continued success and working together and building the best school system for our children to thrive. And so with that, if there are no other questions or comments, this meeting is adjourned. We're going to continue our work session with the next item on the agenda. And Madam City Manager, you have the floor.
Good evening. We're going to continue the work session with a zoning amendment, CA 23-01, and I am going to request that Jeff Miller come up and do the presentation for this proposed code amendment.
Good evening, Attorney Miller.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. I know you all have I am Jeff Miller, Deputy City Attorney, and I know you all have another very important presentation from the assessor coming up, so I'm going to try to be very quick and efficient with this presentation. As everyone's aware, our current zoning ordinance provides that if you apply for a use permit or a rezoning application and you are denied, you have to wait a full year before you can refile another application. In January of this year, City Council adopted a resolution asking staff to come up with language to allow council to bring back denied applications for rehearing before the one-year period was up. Staff drafted language, and that was presented to Planning Commission in its February meeting. And we're hoping to have final language for you at your March 14th meeting. Planning Commission recommended approval of the language that staff had drafted, but also recommended that council consider a couple of other tweaks. And that's what we're here to discuss tonight. And I'm hoping to present each of those 2 tweaks to you and get a consensus on whether to incorporate them into the language. This is the current draft language, and it essentially provides that if an application is denied, then at a subsequent meeting, a member of City Council can move to have the application brought back before council again before the one-year period expires. If that motion is seconded and approved, then a public hearing would be scheduled in front of City Council as soon as possible, which would generally be 2 meetings out, so about a month. Council would hold the public hearing and then could vote again on the application. Under the current language, the application would not go back down to Planning Commission for Planning Commission to make another recommendation on the application. The first of the 2 recommendations from Planning Commission that you consider would be that if Planning Commission initially had recommended denial of the application, then instead of having the reconsidered application come directly to council, it would be remanded back to Planning Commission for Planning Commission to again issue a recommendation on the application. This would give council the benefit of knowing whether Planning Commission's opinion had changed on the matter, but it would add an extra month to 2 months to the process. So you'd be looking at 2 to 3 months before the item got to council for a public hearing and vote. At this point, I'd look for a consensus on council on whether you want to add that language about Planning Commission to the proposed language as it exists right now.
Just so I'm clear, Attorney Miller, you're asking council for a consensus on this item?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we have a consensus, or do you have a question, sir? Okay, Council, Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yeah, Attorney Miller, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So what the Planning Commission is recommending, this is an additional language so that a council member could not unilaterally just recommend that a project has been denied to bring it back to council, that it would have to go to the Planning Commission. Is that what this language is attempting to do?
Well, an application would only come back on a vote of the entire council. So any council member could make a motion to bring, this is under the existing proposed amendment. So any member could make a motion to bring it back, but it would have to get 4 votes or a majority of a quorum in order to come back to council. What Planning Commission is saying is if that application that is going to be reheard, if Planning Commission originally recommended denial, then they're suggesting that council may want to send it back down to Planning Commission for another recommendation before council holds another public hearing and acts on it.
Okay, so instead of it just being solely in the hands of council, and well, of course, this is a denial, and so
Yes.
if a review is denied by council, then the Planning Commission is recommending that if council wishes to bring that back, that it sends it back down to the Planning Commission first for the Planning Commission to make another recommendation.
Yes, sir, unless the Planning Commission recommended approval in the first place.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that it should be reviewed by the Planning Commission before it just unilaterally comes back to council like that. If I'm hearing you correctly, the way it is amended as of now, a council member could ask for a project that was denied to come back to council. Council votes on it, and then council takes another vote to approve it, if necessary. So,
yes, sir, after a public hearing.
yeah, I think that circumvents the whole purpose of why we even have a Planning Commission. And so I would be in favor, because that can become very political on the council part, that council members just select certain projects that have been denied, and for whatever reason, they may not even be presented. But I think it should be reviewed by the Planning Commission again for a recommendation to come from the Planning Commission. So I would support it going back to Planning Commission as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Yes, sir.
And this is the Planning Commission's recommendation?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Are there any other questions on this matter? Seeing none, then we just need a show of consensus if we are all in agreement that the recommended denial will go back to Planning Commission for review. Show by hand. You have the consensus, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Planning Commission's second recommendation, the current draft ordinance does not address situations where the application itself would be changed. In other words, you're voting on the same application at the rehearing. And as of right now, with that language, the year waiting period would still apply if an applicant needed to make modifications to their application. Planning Commission suggested that council may want to address that also and allow changed applications to come back more quickly than the 1 year waiting period. And the easiest way to do that would be to simply change this is the existing language in the zoning ordinance, simply change the red language up there from 12 months to a lesser time period. State law allows localities to have up to a 1 year waiting period, but does not mandate any waiting period at all. So you could change that to 6 months, you could change it to 3 months, you could change it however you wanted.
Dr. Whitaker, do you have your hand up? Sir?
Yes.
Okay, you have the floor.
So, Mr. Miller, that first, if an application to amend the text of this ordinance or zoning map, so why is that language there if it's just speaking to an application coming from some business?
Well, a
person?
rezoning application is generally related to the zoning map. What is being changed when someone asks to rezone their property is the zoning map. So that covers that scenario.
Okay.
Also, there's a separate section dealing with use permits, which would simply track the language that we put in the rezoning. So we didn't want to just double up to no purpose with the language here.
Okay. What, did the Planning Commission have a recommendation for what that time period should be?
They didn't provide a specific recommendation.
Any particular reason why they didn't provide that?
I think it was simply the context in which it came up. They didn't consider the issue of the specific time period as a whole. I think they were more concerned with the idea of applications that get changed being able to come back.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to hear a recommendation from planning on this versus just council just deciding on a time period arbitrarily.
I agree with that, and however, Mr. Miller, you can correct me. Council does have the authority to make changes to the ordinance. Do they or do they not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, as he had stated, the state law indicates that you don't even have to have a time frame, and I guess planning. If we just bring it back to planning, they can give us a recommendation, but at the end of the day, we're still going to make the decision. So for me, the decision rests in the hands of council. How do we want to proceed? Do we want it to be 0? Do we want it to be 6 months? Whatever this group thinks that's appropriate, I think that's probably what we need to do.
Can I just ask?
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor. I'll come back to you, sir.
Do we know what other municipalities, what their language reads?
We have here Ms. Julie Chop, who I believe has done some research into that.
I think it'd be good to know how they handle this.
Hi. The majority of the surrounding localities do have a 1 year 12-month waiting period. Some also have the reconsideration language in there, but it kind of varies depending on if it applies to just a use permit application or both a use permit and the rezoning application. But for the majority, for Hampton, Suffolk, Newport News, Norfolk, and Chesapeake, they all had some form of a 1-year waiting period. I didn't find any other number besides a 1 year.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Whitaker, did you want the floor again?
Well, yeah, a couple,
Okay.
now that I've heard that report, so what is the impetus behind why this is even being brought before council at this time, this change?
Well, it was a resolution adopted by council in January.
Right, I realize that, but I'm saying, why did it even come up? What was the pressing issue that caused it to come up?
I don't know, sir.
So we just decided to look at this ordinance and change it, but there was no rationale behind it?
Good evening, council. This was initiated by the previous planning director in December, or last year in '22. It came up, I don't know, it was before September clearly, but it came to council, and you all wanted it to come back by March. He had given y'all a date and said, hey, I think I can bring this back by March. This was to the old council. So this was just a follow-up to the time period you said you wanted it to come back to council with more language.
Well,
You have the floor, sir.
thank you. Well, if what I understand from the previous presentation by, is that attorney?
Chop.
Ms. Chop?
In planning department.
That this is consistent across the jurisdictions, this 1-year time period. So my question again is, why is it that Portsmouth is seeking this radical change from what other jurisdictions are doing? Is it something pressing or urgent, or has it been some issue that has been raised? That's what I'm trying to find out.
Well, I think the 1 year, reducing the 1 year may be unique among the other jurisdictions, but we would not be the only jurisdiction to allow council to bring back an application that had been denied. In fact, I think Suffolk and Virginia Beach both allow that. Is that correct? Yeah.
Within what time period?
I believe it's substantially similar to what's been proposed.
So within a year? It has to be a year before they bring it back?
Earlier than a year.
Earlier than a year?
Yes, sir.
You know that time period? Are you talking about a use permit?
Suffolk does allow a use permit to be brought back, a denied use permit to be brought back within a year. If it's been longer than a year, then they would just reapply for a new use permit. So the language that was used to draft the proposed language for this amendment was largely from Suffolk's ordinance.
So it's just open within a year, so that could be any time period within a year?
Correct.
Vice Mayor Lucas Burke, then Councilman Moody, then Ms. Terry. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. I guess, looking at the effects of the denial, I don't see why we would need to change it within 12 months if that's the, what's happening across the region. If 12 months is what is allowed, then I think that should stand, unless you're going to put some other provisions in there, something like if it was denied by a majority or denied by a supermajority, because that's more likely it's not going to change within 1 year until, the council changes. So I guess if we're going to just leave it flat like it is, I think the 12 months would stand unless we put in provisions of a majority, denied by a majority council.
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Well, I guess my question is, have we lost any potential projects that, because they were initially denied and had to wait a year to come back? I mean, I don't understand what the pitfalls are, or I can see what the advantages would be to a developer that, had his project denied, or had her project denied, and made the necessary changes instead of having to wait a year to get it reconsidered. They can do it in, 6 months, 90 days, whatever. I mean, can you think of any pitfalls in lessening the 1-year wait?
Not particularly.
I mean,
can't.
to me, it's almost arbitrary. I never like doing something just because everybody else does it. And if it will help bring some needed development to our city, I say let's make a change, maybe not a radical change of 30 days, but maybe even 6 months. I'm open to 6 months. Unless Ms. Terry.
Ms. Terry, you have the floor, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to shed some light on this, and again, this was something that was just brought up, and we just wanted to bring it back, but I think there's a piece missing that I just want council to be aware of. Well, 2 pieces. Yes, it was we were looking at this, or this was brought to us because it would help assist with development. The second piece of that, council can decide at any time, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Miller, by changing it from 12 months, if a person came and said, hey, I want to build something, and council denied that development project, council could say, no, and you can't come back for 6 months. You can't come back because you have that 1-year window. You can set it at that time when they bring in an application. If you deny it, you can say, and don't come back for that year. Is that right? Or can they set the time frame within that year to say, you can come back in 3 months, you can't come back for 12 months? Is that something, because I think the concern is being able to pick a date today, they're just getting this information and they are not even clear of why we're doing it. So I think it was for the purpose of development, but to inform them or let them know that they have the option at that time. They don't have to set a 3-month or a 6-month or a 9-month. They can say when a person denies, you can't come back. So correct me if I'm wrong, because that's what my thought was.
That becomes arbitrary.
In other words,
Hold on, guys.
are you,
Mr. Hugo had his hand up, so I'd like to hear what he has to say, then we'll go down the road.
Yeah, thanks, Mr.
Oh,
Mayor.
okay.
So I attended the Planning Commission meeting where this was discussed. To Councilman Moody's point, he's spot on. The issue is if a developer brings a project and it gets denied, do we want to insist that the developer wait a year before he's allowed to bring the project back? And therefore, do we take the risk of losing that developer to take his project to some other community in Hampton Roads? And so the 12 years is a maximum, 12 months is a maximum according to the state. It could be as little as 0. We could, if we chose to and set it at 0, the developer could turn around and bring the thing back the following week if he fixed the things that needed to be fixed. It's unlikely that he's going to be able to do that in a day. And so I think if we adopt this language, it gives us the opportunity, if we find out that a developer is ready to bring the project back because things that caused it to be denied have been addressed, we're not stuck waiting for a year. We're letting the guy or the gal bring their development back to City Council for us to review it again. The question then that was addressed in Planning Commission, kind of the wrinkle, there are times when the Planning Commission approves and City Council denies. There are times when Planning Commission denies and City Council denies. They just wanted to clarify that if they denied, they wanted to see it again before they sent it to City Council for us to review. And so the consensus that we just agreed to a minute ago was to give us the opportunity to invite developers back inside of 12 months. But if the Planning Commission denied it the first time, it's going to visit them before it comes back to us so that we get the benefit of the planning staff and the Planning Commission review to make sure that things that needed to get fixed, in fact, got fixed.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Whitaker, then Mr. Moody. You got the
Yeah,
last word.
the consensus that we took, it was before Ms. Chop had given us the regional information. If it's that simple that they just have to fix something and come back within a week, then I think council would have, in the use permit hearing, would have addressed that and given them that flexibility at that point instead of, because I've seen times where I believe we've told them to come back within our meeting. So if it's that simple, that's already been taken care of. So that can happen under the ordinance that we presently have. What happens is that you have where a council is not going to approve a project. And really, if they come back within 2 weeks and that's the same council and the issues that were there are still there, that's not going to pass. So I would say, because I think it was a little more political than anything, I would say, given that the information Ms. Chop has given across the region, that we just leave it where it is. We have been able to address if there are issues that Mr. Hugo brought up, that it's just something simple to fix that can be handled within the hearing. We can tell them, come back 2 weeks, we'll address it then. But to change the whole ordinance and start putting in arbitrary time periods, I think is unnecessary. I think the ordinance is working. I haven't seen anyone come before us with any substantial complaints.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Actually, when we had the second reading, we had it when Holly Cove was approved. If not for that, they would have had to wait another year. So that's a recent example of a developer potentially having to wait another year. In that case, if they had to wait another year, they would have lost their funding through some tax credits. My question to the attorney is, does the ordinance have to have a finite time period?
I think Councilman Whitaker mentioned that it would be arbitrary, potentially, if you did not. I think you could perhaps come up with a range that you could implement, but I think you might be overcomplicating your life in doing that.
Yeah, and I go back to, why can't we have something that's more reasonable than a year? And I say split the time period and have a 6-month period. And I think that it's arbitrary, but
I agree.
but it's less than the potential of losing a developer having to wait a year. So,
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor.
Well, Councilman Moody raised a relevant point that illustrates that we can leave it as is, because you mentioned the Holly Point project. And I remember that, and there was a second reading that occurred, I believe, was it like 2 weeks later at the following council meeting?
yes.
And so within that time period, that developer did whatever fix or whatever was needed. 2 weeks, it was approved. It was denied on the first reading. And then I think it was your vote. It was your vote 2 weeks later that approved it. And so I'm saying it works with what we have now instead of making all of this major change to the ordinance, because that project did work with what the project went up, the developer stayed in the city, and we addressed it.
But we don't have the second reading.
We can always bring that back. we can just bring that back.
So the discussion has been very robust, but I think we need to frame it up and we need to take a consensus. And the consensus is asking for, do we go with 12, no, the consensus was we leave it open-ended, without a time frame. I think it's time for us to ask the question.
Ms. Mayor, can the consensus be that we just leave the ordinance as is?
We can take a consensus vote on that, if it's the pleasure of the council. So the first consensus, I would recommend is the consensus that is before us. And the consensus before us is, do we want a time frame or do we not? And just speaking and listening to the discussion, I would think that we would want to be open for business. So I would recommend that we put no time frame on it, since it is the council's authority to approve it or not to approve it anyway. So therefore, I'm asking for a consensus to have no time frame on it at this time. So if we could get a show of hands to have no time frame at this time. Okay, that's 5. So would you like us to consider your consensus as well, sir?
Is it in order?
It is in order.
Oh.
It is in order, yes.
So if you just voted to not have any time frame.
That's what the vote was, sir.
But what I was raising was just leave the ordinance as is, which means we don't even get into time frame.
Okay, and we can take that vote. Is there a consensus to leave the ordinance as it is? You have your consensus, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, questions. So with no time frame, then council can decide project by project what that time frame is?
No, without a time frame, anyone could reapply immediately upon denial.
Okay, all right.
So it almost goes back to the.
Thank you, sir.
Second reading.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Madam City Manager, ma'am.
The next presentation is for the annual reassessment. Oh, sorry.
Okay, since we're in the process of drafting this new language, it has been brought to my attention, do we want to consider consensus for the second reading to come back as a council? Do we have a consensus for the second reading?
For denied projects, right.
For denied projects.
If you don't mind, can I say something? Council members, keep in mind that you all also had a provision that if you denied an item, that I would ask you whether you, well, that was when you were doing second readings. You're not doing them anymore. So it really is necessary to have the second reading. Disregard.
So do,
Question. Okay, so I made the motion or the request that we do away with the second reading if it was approved by a majority or a supermajority. So that was for approval. So we need to do something separate for denials? Is that what we're calling for? Or are we calling for second readings altogether? Because, I mean, it wouldn't need to come back if it's approved by a supermajority. I mean, that's wasting the developer's time and our time. So only for denials is what we're looking for. Okay, thank you.
And council members, along that line, I would recommend that the language be that you all say whether or not you want it to be able to come back or not. Because if you all are adamantly determined you don't want that item to come back, it's no need for us to automatically bring it back. So just like you were doing before, whether you said whether or not an item could come back, because there might be something you're waiting for them to get, information you're waiting for them to get to you, this would allow you the opportunity, you could deny it, but you could also have it come back at your next meeting, and they could have an opportunity to bring you additional information if necessary.
So at that point, there would almost have to be a consensus
Yes,
on
sir.
every denial, on whether council wants to bring it back
Correct.
or not.
Yes,
Right.
sir.
And if they're denied on the second reading, then they can come back at any time after that.
That would be part of what you would decide on the second reading, whether they could come back or not.
But I thought we just gave consensus for the,
Well, by adding the second reading, I think it creates an endpoint to that.
does it?
We could draft
Does it?
it so. We could, I can answer that question as a city attorney. We can draft it so.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay.
Does that change the consensus for anybody?
No, I just don't see, if you're gonna have a second reading, then I don't see why we needed the previous consensus.
That's fair. We'll consider all of that and bring the language back for you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Doris, so you have the floor.
Thank you. Mayor Glover, Vice Mayor Barnes, members of council, colleagues. My name's Pat Doris. I'm the city assessor. I'd like to share with you the 2023 reassessment, some of my findings from that.
Excuse me, Vice Mayor Lucas Burke.
I apologize.
That's okay, just want for the record, for it to be corrected.
Thank you very much. I apologize.
Vice Mayor Barnes.
The purpose of this briefing is I do apologize. I will pay for that dearly. I apologize. The purpose of the meeting is to go through this 2023 reassessment and to inform y'all changes in certain categories and descriptors of the values of properties. Of course, we have single-family, commercial, apartments, whatnot. What I'd like to do is walk through it, and eventually we can go through each neighborhood real quickly towards the end. But first of all, I got to impress upon you none of this could be possible without the staff in the office. Not me, but it's the staff. The Deputy Assessor, Steve Edwards, Supervisor Thomas Quick, Earl Gaskins, Patricia Hurdle, Mary Sethel, Dorothy Morgan, and our newest hire, Maya Washington. And we're hopefully going to hire a commercial appraiser very shortly. Again, not possible without their efforts. The success of the team is the success of the team. The failure is what we just witnessed, me. So just on a real broad basis, the overview of the assessor's office. The purpose of the assessment is to distribute the tax burden evenly across all taxable properties. Let me repeat that. The purpose of these ad valorem assessments is to distribute the tax burden across all taxable properties. Okay, the state code requires us to be at 100% of market value. That's a moving target. These past few years, we've obviously seen the real estate market accelerate rapidly. What it will do in the future, we'll find out. But we have to gauge it on facts. And the facts as we know them are past sales. We measure those sales by our assessment to sale ratio. The goal is to be 100% of fair market value. And I'm going to come back to that in a little while and discuss some reasons. Right now, we started in a ballpark of about 85% overall in the city, excluding multifamilies, and we're ending at about 95% of assessment sale ratio. The goal of this is to improve equity, uniformity among similar type properties. We always discover, identify, list, value properties. It's a constant job of looking for improvements, looking for elements that have been missed to value them accordingly. Again, why? So we evenly distribute the burden of taxation across all taxable properties. And we've got a camera system that we are still trying to employ and we will get to. And our staffing levels have been low. Again, why I had to point to the staff. The low staffing levels and what they've accomplished this past year is incredible. Market value defined. I'm not going to belate reading this. It's very common knowledge. Anybody can Google it and see the definition of fair market value. Here's where we start getting into the meats of what happened. Here are reassessment results. So our land book last year, and I'm going to just round numbers, about $15 billion. That includes exempt and taxable property. Including that has been our $600 million of value we've included over the past year in building permits, exempt to taxable properties, et cetera. The proposed land book, middle of the page, July 1st, 2023, is nearly $17 billion. Note each one of those, we're maintaining approximately a 40% balance of our exempt property. So the overall increase in the land book is 14.5%. The increase in taxable is 11.5%. Residential went up about 12.6%. This gets into the real meat of what happened with the properties. It breaks it down by categories or descriptors. Again, you get residential, exempt, commercial, multifamily, and industrial. Not the last column, second to the last column gives you the percent change. Residential, 12.66% increase. Exempt, 14.5 roughly. Commercial, only 2%, just slightly less. Exempt commercial, 19. Multifamily, nearly 32% increase in multifamily. This is mainly attributed to the large multifamily properties. If we looked at the ratios of those, the ratios are well below 50%, and now they've been brought up into that 95% range. We went through all the large multifamily properties, valued them by the income approach, looking at what they're estimating their rents to be or what they're charging for rents, taken out for the vacancies, which have remained very low, and then taking out expenses and capitalizing the net income to arrive at a value. The result was a very large increase with multifamily properties. And we can go down through there, and we'll also see the industrial went up very little. The end result being getting back to the overall increase was 11.56. Again, I want to note residential property, which is most everybody lives in, 12.66%. And I want to kind of phrase a couple things into this. The impact to the individual who owns these homes. Our average home value is about $235,000. They're paying roughly now about $3,000 a year in taxes, $255 a month. Using that 12.66% increase, that takes us up to an annual assessment of $3,400, an increase of $287 a month. It's notable, and I just wanted to share that with you. This is for what the $235,000 average home, and I'm adding in the 12.66 to get us to $262,000. But I want to share the impact of this increase. It's notable. It should be recognized. Also in this slide, down at the bottom, I note the lowered rate necessary to offset the assessment increase, also known as the lowered tax rate. To basically get a net neutral amount, we're at $1.30 right now. Based on this reassessment, the net neutral amount would be $1.17. Just pointing that out. That's due to the increase of the overall aggregate assessment. That's where the rate goes to. Again, I just run through the reassessment results. Residential, 12.66% increase. Again, I noted on the average $235,000 house, then going to $262,000, the tax impact to individuals. Virtually every residential neighborhood went up. A few of them went down because we're always looking for equity among all property types. Commercial properties went up 7.5%. Multifamily, again, nearly 32%. And industrial properties went up by 4%. This just runs over some of our average sale prices. And this is important because the top category is the entire year. Each following one is by quarter, by quarter, by quarter. If we think back through this past year, the first quarter and I don't want to say we were in normal market conditions, but interest rates were much less. And it wasn't until the second, third, and fourth quarters in which interest rates spiked. Despite that, the volume of sales have slowed. Inventory slightly increased. Note the day on the market hasn't changed. The list of sale price hasn't changed. The difference between our the assessment to sale ratio has remained fairly low, the 85% where we started. So despite the changes in the residential market, we're still poised in a very strong position. List price, sale prices remain fairly stable. Marketing time, days on market, fairly stable. Notable, actually, considering the increasing interest rate. Nearly 300 basis points, 3.25 or so to 6.5, 6.25 down. And here's our overall assessment. This is where I mentioned we started at about 85% assessment to sale ratio, and we dropped into I brought us into about the 95% ratio. Again, the state mandates wants us to be at 100% of fair market value. These aren't just the only numbers we look at. We're looking at things like coefficient of dispersion. I look at the average distance from the volume of sales in a given neighborhood, which is the coefficient of dispersion. It's just another statistic to look at. What we don't want to do is overrun properties' values. So I've taken that in consideration when we arrive at the 95%. Here we have neighborhood, which I'm sure everybody's going to be kind of interested in. Again, your property may or may not go up by the overall neighborhood. That amount, it could be a little bit more, could be a little bit less. We're always trying to refine each property class and each neighborhood. So these are aggregate numbers per neighborhood, just as the total numbers are the aggregate for the city. And if anybody wants to find their particular neighborhood, you can look through here, see about where you're going to end up. And again, the rationale here, look at the ratio, the first ratio, the 2022, and then the reassessment ratio. Again, the goal is to be at 100%. That's what we're striving for. And these are by neighborhood, And just to touch base, programs administered by us, exemptions, rehab, environmental, also land use. Social Services does the senior citizen one. Commissioner of Revenue does the DAVs. And of all of these, and we're not the lone city, the revenue that's listed for our residential properties, for DAVs, you have to reduce out $2.3 million. That's a growing number. There's a lot of DAVs coming into each city. Again, we're not alone in that. That's a Hampton Roads issue. I suspect localities on the other side of the state are not being impacted like we are with the DAVs. We all probably have relations to military people, whatnot. That's not an issue. The issue is the state mandate on this. We have to accept it. Casino. I'm sure that's going to come up. I'm in the midst of trying to figure out the value of the casino. If it was a 1 million square foot regional mall, warehouse, manufacturing facility, I wouldn't have a problem with it. The casino has so many intangible and tangible elements. I've reached out to a casino expert to help us value it. This is important. While I wasn't here, I have talked to other people, my predecessor, who was involved in VIG. We want to make sure we have the value on a component or a value of this type of nature substantially defensible. We don't want to lose in court. We don't want to spend that money. We want to win. Final remarks. We're going to send out the notices. Just had another refinement with the vendor to send them out. And appeals. We will be available for appeals March 13th through the 24th. If you always have a concern, you can always call our office. We'll always be taking into effect the characteristics of a property. If we've overassessed you by virtue of too much square footage, whatnot, we can address that. But the appeal periods for this reassessment are coming up. We have the informals in March, and the Board of Equalization will be following. And with that, questions?
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have
Yes,
the
sir.
floor.
Yes,
Councilman Tillage.
Thank you. The increase on the multifamily
Yes, sir.
properties, 32%, what was the issue there why we're seeing that significant increase?
Many of the large apartments in the city have sold in the last few years. Let's say the distance between the sale price and the assessment was great. Again, many were assessment sale ratio under 60%, 30%, 40%. That gets attention. We looked at them, again, looking at what they charge for rents. If they provided them, we utilized them. Going through what standard expenses are and capitalizing the values, even taking in consideration the expansion of the capitalization rate the past year, this is the number we resulted in. Again, we ended up going from south of 60-some-odd% of assessment sale ratio for the apartments to just over 95% for the multifamilies. And it's primarily attributed to the larger ones.
So it wasn't so much so that they were undervalued in previous years, it's just that in the present market, they're selling at higher rates?
Correct,
Okay,
sure.
all right.
Councilman Tillage, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. So my question is related to, when we're looking at the different neighborhoods on this list, we see, of course, we see a influx or a decrease based upon the neighborhood. One of my biggest concerns, though, is when we're looking at some of these neighborhoods that have a lower median household income. We're looking at a tax increase. One of the neighborhoods, I'm trying to find it, had a 40% increase in assessment. And so, I mean, you're looking at a 40% increase in their real estate tax for this year. And so, is there a way, I know you made mention of there being a senior relief program, a disabled program, as well as a veteran.
Right.
But what about, and I guess it's more of a council question, if we could find a way to find relief for the average citizen that may not fall in the senior citizen, disabled, or veteran. But we're looking at, for example, Cavalier Manor, Craddock, Holland Bitmore, Charlestown Townhomes, Douglas Park. I mean, these are Mount Herman. These
sir.
are historical neighborhoods that have low median income, but nobody's paychecks are going up. And so, if we can find a way to provide a tax relief in a form of an assessment discount, which I know previous councils have done. But if we can look forward to that for a council, so if we can get a report, just for my knowledge, I would like to see a report from the revenue that was generated in real estate tax for last year versus what this report would be proposing, and then comparing that to what we can do for a discount for our citizens across the city.
Yes, sir. And I'll be glad to sit down and go over this with you. This is why I bring up the lowered rate necessary to offset the assessment increase. We're at $1.30 right now. Just taking it verbatim and looking at, our budgetary needs stay the same, which they won't, we would go to $1.17. That would effectively put one paying the same real estate tax. I mean, not necessarily, but that would achieve a pretty similar result. And that's why I push this out here just as an informational aspect. These are large increases. And that's why I also mentioned the monthly real estate tax to individuals. These are impactful, and I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few concerns. First of all, I'd like to, Councilman Tillage, we do have a tax abatement and tax freeze program available for people who meet the criteria in both of those programs. But my question is, and I'm gonna make the same statement that I did, I think, over a year ago, and that's the camera system. We're still talking about that.
We are.
And that is totally unacceptable. You made the statement back then that you were concerned that it's been so long it's outdated. Well, we know to replace something that hasn't even been used yet is terrible. The other thing is, and I said this last year when you made the same presentation, that residential property is carrying the burden. And I think your reply to me at that time was that you didn't have enough commercial appraisers.
Right.
And how many have you hired since then?
Commercial appraisers, hired a deputy assessor who's pretty good at appraising commercial property.
That's not that's not a commercial appraiser that's out in the field.
Right.
And to me, that's two major areas that you had told this council that were going to be addressed, and they have not been. So that both of those are unacceptable. I'm not pleased at all with that, because both of those would potentially lessen the burden on the residential property owner.
Sure. Yes, sir.
That's all I have to say. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Hugel, sir, you have the floor, then Dr. Whitaker.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I hope that we will use this information to go after the tax rate. So piling on to Councilman Tillage's concern about increase in total real estate tax that we're putting on the citizens, I think this opens the door for us to have a serious conversation about reducing our tax rate from $1.30 to something lower than that.
Thank you, sir. Vice Mayor Lucas Burke, ma'am, and then Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, I guess my question too is the reassessment results and seeing how we go from $1.30 to $1.17. I mean, I know that our budget is based on the revenue from the $1.30, and just wondering if that has been taken into consideration. Our budget, has that been brought? Okay, so that might be an issue that might not fly if our budget can't sustain that amount. We all want a lower real estate, but I was just wondering how we came to that. Is it because we have more houses? We need more houses, we need more affordable housing. Our citizens that are in those areas on the residential sheets cannot afford a 40% increase. So I think that this might need some more massaging before it can be reality. I know that we have citizens that are watching this presentation and don't want to really lead someone to believe that, these are the results. And of course, the casino methods will need to be factored in, and of course, having a consultant who really understands how that's going to affect that. But I don't see how it's going to happen in 1 year. It might be a 3 to 5 year time frame before we'll even realize what revenues we're gaining from the casino. And I know that it's supposed for us to have 12 million to 16 million a year that's supposed to come back to the city, but we don't know how those actual figures are going to take in place. And my concern was with the camera system too. We don't see any movement on it. So what is the major holdup?
Right.
Do we need training? Do we need staffing?
Staffing.
Okay.
Staffing. And to speak to your question, finding a commercial appraiser is not easy. Paying them is 6 figures or near that. I have found one, and I hope to bring him in shortly.
And could that be like a contracted kind of a thing? I don't know.
We could do that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, I just want to, Mr. Doris, you have to follow certain state law guidelines as far as how properties are appraised.
Yes, sir.
okay? So when you were hired, you noted that there were some assessment issues that were in the city, that money was being left on the table.
Yes, sir.
And so some of that has been addressed. And so now the issue falls back on council, given that you're doing assessments within the guidelines of the state code, then how do we remedy that for the citizens? So that's a council issue. The issue as far as you hiring and staffing, you are facing the same challenges that our school district face because of the COVID issues and the hiring. We're seeing that across organizations. So for council member to chide you on not hiring, it's consistent across the country that there have been HR issues. And so I think we need to be transparent and honest about that. As far as the CAMEL system, there was discussion with you previously that you were to meet with council and discuss your staffing needs. That has not occurred.
Yes, sir.
And so I just want to make sure before we become very abrupt that we remain fair in how we said we were going to operate. So I wanted to make that public. And also, you have done what the code has required you to do. And so
That's
it's a
correct,
matter
sir.
of us to try to remedy that. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues on council? I do have one question for you. So you indicated that the CAMUS system is not fully functional, and there is another system that we have in place. Do you know the difference? What are the differences between those two systems? Is there incompatibility? Are they compatible? Does one lead you to adequately and accurately assess the properties that you are assessing, the older system versus the CAMUS system? Would, in essence, the question is, would there be more efficiencies in the CAMUS system versus the current system?
Much more efficient. For example, if you ask me a question, provide me all the homes built between let's say 1952 and 1960. The new CAMUS system, I could query that myself, have the information, segregate it, provide it in a multitude of ways. The old system, I got to go through the IT program. There's one person that's key to operating it. The actual rates within the old system, and the old system has been excellent, but it was built in the 60s. I have a book sitting in the office from 1972. It was good for its days. The rates are outdated. The application of how you do a model, if you will, are difficult at best. The new system, which is being adopted virtually by every surrounding jurisdiction. Yes, sir?
No.
Okay.
And I understand that, and I appreciate
Right.
the explanation. So, which leads me to my second question. You've obviously been an assessor in the assessor business for a while.
Yes, sir.
And understanding the differences between the old system, what it could do and its capabilities, and the new system, what it would do with its capabilities. I know we had talked about that being a priority because we understood as a council the implication of not having that in place because that puts us at a disadvantage. I'm not understanding why that wasn't a priority. And even so, if you still had issues, there was a lot of time for you to come to us to say, hey, I really need issues because this will help me better evaluate what the actual number needs to be. That's really all I wanted to ask. But thank you for your response. Sir, sir, hold on a minute. Do you have anything else to add to that?
I'll answer questions.
Okay. Sir, you have the floor.
Just want to point out again, the issue was brought to council, and the staffing issue becomes a budget issue. And so I just want to be fair to Mr. Doris, that it's not a Doris issue, it's a council issue. And I think we should be fair in how it's handled. I think you did what you said you would do. And like I said, it's on council now as to how we deal with this. But I think I think we see what's happening, but I want it to be a fair process that you know that you have not come to, council has not budgeted for those
Right.
positions.
And I'm remiss for not coming to council.
Well,
making
it's
my
not,
needs
it's not
known, sir.
that, because we said we were gonna set up a meeting with you, and that has not happened. And so I just want to be fair about that. It's not your issue.
Right, and then the final thing, just to be clear on what Dr. Whitaker is referring to, he's absolutely right. When we had a meeting, we said we would discuss that going forward in '23. That has no implication to what happened in '22. So I appreciate you pointing that out, sir. And if you don't have anything, are you done with your presentation?
Yes, sir, unless there's any other questions.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving right along, are there any other items, Madam Manager, that you need to discuss? We've come to the item, I think, which is City Council Liaison Reports. Are there any reports from my City Council liaisons? Councilman Hugel, sir, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick report from the Military Affairs Committee. Planning for the Memorial Day Parade is rolling along. We've invited military bands and working on settling on who the Grand Marshal of the parade's going to be. So another opportunity to celebrate Memorial Day here in Portsmouth coming up.
Outstanding, sir. Councilman Tillage, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilman Moody and myself, we attended the Economic Development Authority meeting last week, and there was a lot of good conversations surrounding the new innovation district that is going to be on High Street, as well as some conversation regarding future development of the area surrounding the Rivers Casino. And so it's good to be able to hear those types of economic development conversations as we continue to advance Portsmouth in the direction of more economic development. So it was great for that. I also attended the PRHA meeting as well, and great conversations regarding affordable housing for our seniors. They're actually getting ready to break ground on a new project that's going to be over in the Lexington Square area for affordable housing for seniors. And so great things, but that's pretty much the only two topics I have right now.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no, are there any other liaison reports to share with us at this time? Seeing none, that concludes our work session. We will reconvene in 5 minutes. I'll give everyone 5 minutes to get themselves together. This meeting is adjourned, and we will begin back at 7:18.